just a brief background on myself. I have 2 PhDs, one in IT security and digital signatures and one in law. I won't go into what they were in. I was a practicing solicitor for 22 years, and then I saw the light, shall we say. I'm a first part-time professor at the Information Security Institute. Our institute has been going for more than 20 years. In the last 3 years, we became a multidisciplinary institute in that we are now comprised of engineering researchers, legal researchers, business researchers, social scientists, and a couple of accountants. Well, I don't regard them as business people, even though they're in the faculty of business. We have 43 professors who are doing research and currently have 89 PhD students and 41, I believe, research master's students in various areas of dealing with IT security, social policy issues, and etc. associated to that. Now, this afternoon's, or this session, is dealing with network societies. And it was mentioned earlier about the 2 dogs, the famous Peter Steiner cartoon in the 1993 New Yorker, where you have one dog sitting on a chair and another dog sitting right next to it, and the first dog says to the second dog, "No one knows that you're a dog when you're on the internet." And at the centre of that, and that was in 1993, it was rather very forthright and far-reaching by Peter Steiner at the New Yorker, because at the centre of that is authentication. And you have an issue here of dealing with borderless environments. I've just had a paper published at Oxford dealing with this issue and the problems of multi-jurisdictions and associations with jurisdictional issues and non-border relationships or cross-border relationships. Virtual communities is what my second PhD was in. It was dealing with theories of property in cyberspace. And it is a known fact, and in dealing with virtual communities, that the criminal element is now getting involved in that environment in a very big way. Mainly through money laundering at this very present moment, but there are other activities that they want to take advantage of. With that issue, it's interesting, he says, are we ready for the battlefield of the 21st century? Personally, I don't know. It was interesting what Jody Westby mentioned, that the amount of money that the US defence is going to be spending, the US government is going to spend on classified type research and very little on unclassified research, yet the vast majority of the infrastructure is owned by unclassified organisations. So without any further ado, I was going to start with Tom Ilub on my right. So, Tom, please.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Tom Ilube. I'm from an online identity company in the UK. And I think that the battlefield that is of most interest, at least of most interest to me, is that of digital identity. And by that I mean the personal information that defines us in the online world. We know that it is increasingly important that more and more people make decisions about us based on what they see in the online world, and yet for most of us it's something that we're not aware of. People occasionally Google themselves, but for most of us here perhaps we're not aware just how visible we are in the digital world and how valuable that information is. We don't ascribe much value to it, but cyber criminals do. In fact, we did some research in the UK amongst 100 fraudsters and asked them what they did with personal information, how they got it, and what sort of amounts of money they thought they could make if they got hold of your or my digital identity, and the average amount that came out as a value that they thought it was worth was £85,000, i.e. the average fraudster, if they get hold of your identity and work with it over a period of time, believe that they can make that much money out of it. That's why it's valuable. That's why there is an industry developing in stealing people's personal information and their digital identities. Identity theft in the UK is one of the fastest growing digital crimes. It's estimated there are about 130,000 a year, growing at about 40% a year and costing the UK economy something like £1.3 billion a year. And the other thing we did was to ask fraudsters, what do they actually do? How do they actually go about getting this information, and what do they do with it when they've got it? Two interesting insights came out of that. One was that the environment is becoming more organised, not sort of organised totally in an organised crime sense, more loosely coupled, but there are people who specialise more in harvesting personal information, and there are people who specialise in making use of that personal information. We know that there are people who sit down all day behind their computer and just scoop up personal information about you, me, and everyone else, and then sell it on to other people. And there are sites where it's traded and so forth, and it is possible to see them and see what's going on and see the sort of information that flows through them. We also know that people using that information will typically use it initially for financial purposes, to get loans and that sort of thing. But we're seeing a wider variety of uses. One of the odd ones that we saw was for immigration purposes. In the UK, occasionally, if someone wants to get a visa, they will get married to a UK citizen, but the fraudster isn't going to marry them to themselves, so they steal someone else's identity and marry them off to you instead. And that does happen. One of the reasons for this is that the information is now available online. In the UK, often what's talked about is identity fraud. You need to check your bins, you need to use a shredder and so forth. When we talk to fraudsters, they say they hardly go around digging around in people's bins these days because they can get most of the information they need online. And in fact, for a group like this, a fraudster could probably get about a third of the people here. There'd be enough information about you publicly available online to steal your identity. And one of the fraudsters said to us, he said, the internet's great. It used to take me 2 to 3 days to gather enough information to steal someone's identity. Now I can get it done in 2 to 3 hours online. You know, it's applauding the productivity that's come with the online world. The reason for that is that there is just so much information about us online now. Probably, when I look at it, there's about 10 times more information about any of us online than there was maybe 5 years ago, and the rate of information about us appearing online isn't slowing down. So if you look out another 3 to 5 years, there'll be 10 times as much again. And we don't really appreciate how different that makes the world for us as individuals. And the information is being joined up, is being mashed together in ways that we didn't recognize. That information is coming from a couple of different sources. It's often coming from us ourselves. If you look at the social networking world, maybe 200 million people's information is out there now. If you look at what governments are doing in the name of e-government, they're publishing information. And you get these odd situations where, for example, in banks in the UK, you'll often be asked for security reasons for your mother's maiden name, and at the same time the government publishes the births, marriages and deaths records with everyone's mother's maiden name on it. And fraudsters know this perfectly well. So sometimes you get these things going on, well-intentioned, but this is the consequence of it. The change that we're seeing is that fraudsters are starting to use real identities rather than just made-up identities. So they will now take someone else's identity and use it for fraudulent purposes. You're starting to see in the emails that go around asking you for 25 million, that they've now got 25 million pounds they want to transfer to your account. There used to be made-up names there. Now you'll often see the names of real people. They'll just get a delegate list from somewhere and use those names. And it's typical social engineering. You're more likely to respond to someone who actually exists than a made-up name. So we think that identity spam, the proliferation of identities, and we know there are people who are creating just large numbers of identities to use in all sorts of circumstances. We think that this is where the battlefield will move to. And partly it's because the shape of the web itself is changing from a web of documents, which is what it was created as 15, 16 years ago, to a web of data. The semantic web is emerging. It's a web of linked data, and integral to a web of linked data are notions of provenance and identity, and therefore that's where the battlefield emerges.
Thank you. You got in before I even had to tap. Thank you very much, Tom. Akidi, could you please... Thank you.
Thank you very much. I work in Russian Association of Networks and Services, and I am a vice chairman of ITUT Study Group 17, which is the lead study group on telecommunication security. It's responsible for coordination of security across all study groups, and I would like to inform you about one new initiative of our Study Group 17. It's about preparing of annual report for Internet Governance Forum meetings, business use of telecommunication security standards. Report will consist of summary sheets for analyzed standards. Each summary sheet will include the following sections: who does this standard affect, status and summary of standard, business benefits, technologies involved, technical implications. The sheets will be prepared by experts from ITU, ISA, ETSI, ITF, so report will include information about most important information and communication security standards. When developing the report, the following criteria will be applied. The criterion of readiness and ability, it means that security standard contained measures of information security which pertain to readiness and ability of the operators or users to counter the threats. The criterion of the balance of interests. In responding to threats, the balance of stakeholder interests should be maintained. The criterion of cost efficiency. The security standards should prioritize the security countermeasures according to cost efficiency and cost effectiveness. All measures should be ranked according to their potential impact and their estimated implementation cost. The criterion of controllability. All the included in the report standards must be verifiable. And last but not least, the criterion of variety of implementations. There are a number of standards in field of telecommunication and information security, but a standard is the real standard when it's used in real-world applications. Business and governmental bodies need to learn more about standards from their business applications rather than from a technical point of view. We hope the ITU will provide leadership in preparing annual reports on information security standardization processes from the point of view of business applications for supporting procurement strategies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akiri. I can't quite read your name, sorry. Could I now call upon Marco Berg to please explain? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm teaching criminal law, so I might have that perspective in my answer to the question, are we prepared for the battlefield? Because I'm quite old-fashioned. Okay. I'm quite old-fashioned. I'm trying to answer that question that was raised in the headline of the session. Well, if I would be Barack Obama, and the question would be, are we prepared for the battlefield? Can we win the war? I would probably say, yes, we can. But I'm not. I'm a scientist, so my answer, my question to you would be, well, that's depending on the question, on the definition of what is ready. If we are ready at the moment where we can prevent any cybercrime, any criminal activity, or any attack happening on the internet, I would say no, we are far away from being ready. If the question is, can we investigate all crimes that happen, even if we cannot prevent them? My answer will still be no. We're far away. We can. There is just the tip of the iceberg that we can see, and this is where we can investigate. there are different reasons. There are technical reasons, there are legal reasons. Some of the countries simply don't have the capacities, they don't have the legal background, the legal provisions that are required to investigate cybercrime properly. So, what are we ready? Are we ready in any way? Yes, we are ready to get more efficiency in our investigations. We are making progress, seen from a technical point of view, as well as a legal point of view. More and more countries have realized that cybercrime is a global phenomenon, and they've started to harmonize their laws and to be able to investigate cybercrime on an international level. Convention on Cybercrime is just one example that was mentioned yesterday a couple of times as well. Okay, so when we're speaking about the situation, we're not ready at the moment. How can we get ready? Well, we need to find a balance. This is quite challenging because criminal law, in the criminal law outside the internet, we found this balance, but it took us something like 1,000 years. We had plenty of time to find out, okay, what are the crimes? What kind of crimes do we accept as a society where we say, okay, we cannot investigate them, otherwise we would need complete control of our society? And what crimes are so serious that we say, no, we need to continue to implement new legislation on investigation of those crimes. So if you just look back 10 years, and we're not talking about 1,000 years that we have time to find this balance, if you just look back 10 years, what we realized is a single person can start an attack against 1 million computer systems by spreading out viruses and worms. This is automation. Prosecutors, still we have 1 million cases coming to the prosecution. They cannot automatize this process, but there's somebody who can send out millions of emails. So if you only have 100 criminals and they were sending out 1 million emails with malicious software, then you have 100 million emails. So it's a huge challenge. We see botnets, something we haven't really discussed that intensively 10 years ago, a completely new challenge. If you're not protecting yourself, it's not just like a lack of self-protection and a risk to your data on the computer. You're turning into a risk for the entire internet society. We're talking about anonymous communication. People are able to hide their identity on the internet. Encryption technology. Today you can use very efficient technology to encrypt messages that nobody can really read what you're talking or writing about. Okay, so that is the situation. And within this challenges that we're facing, we have to find a balance. And 10 years might have not been enough time. When I have a look at some of the legislation that is currently implemented, sometimes I get the impression that we start criminalizing things in the internet that we would never criminalize outside the internet. So there are provisions that say if you do something in the internet, it's a criminal act, and if you do the same outside the internet, we simply don't criminalize it. So we need more time to find this balance. And in this process, I think it's very important that we have a close look at the situation in the developing countries and get them on board. It's not sufficient if the United States is ratifying the Convention on Cybercrime and is updating their legislation, despite the fact that they have excellent legislation in place. Most of the child pornography is still stored on U.S. servers, actually because you have the infrastructure. And most of the phishing websites are still on U.S. servers, even though you have the legislation. So having the right legislation alone is not enough, and but this is a process that we need to continue, and we always have to watch the developing countries. So I think ITU is doing a very good job with regard to developing countries. The ITUD did a lot of projects in the last year in developing countries, promoting cybersecurity, promoting the importance of legal solutions. So we need to continue this discussion about how far do we want to go to win the battle. Do we really want to go to the last point? Do we really want full control, or is our society one day going to accept certain risks and we simply say, yeah, that's what we have to accept. We will not be able to prevent this kind of criminal activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. The next speaker I'm going to call upon is Cedric. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Cedric Renoir. I'm CEO of a company based in Switzerland which is in charge of testing security systems. Basically, it's 10 years I'm organizing hackers team to break into confidential and high security systems. Today I will bring the point of view of the hacker here. To answer the question, I would say that there are two kinds of cyber attacks, two main categories. There are these indiscriminate widespread attacks that target a lot of people to steal a little bit of money from each person and make a huge money on quantity. And there are those other kind of attacks, targeted attacks that will really target one organization, one company, one person in order to get something precise and predefined. And these attacks are, according to my experience, the most dangerous. And I see an increasing number of companies that are quite well protected against massive attack, popular attack. They have monitoring service, they have reaction service, they have policies, they have hardware. Okay, they're not immune, but against indiscriminate attack, they can react. They have something in their mind. But against targeted attack, they mostly don't even know that they are vulnerable to this kind of attack. And most of the time, when they discover that they have been successfully hacked, they're just very surprised. How is it possible? We had firewalls, we had filter, we had antivirus, we had all bunch of technical measures and organizational measures that were meant to fight widespread attack, well-known attacks. But when a small group of highly skilled and trained persons decide to take on one organization to steal one confidential information, either for money or for competition or for government, any purpose, then the organization find themselves very alone. I can give you a good example that struck very near Switzerland. Is the case of Liechtenstein. They didn't use this time, so just short story about it. German Secret Service bribed someone in a Liechtenstein private bank to obtain the list of customers and then prosecuted these customers in Germany. The biggest surprise for me was not that it happened, but that it didn't happen. It did happen only by bribing someone. What was interesting is that this person had a past in this domain, so this person was hired without background check. What was surprising is that the German took the risk to go there in Liechtenstein to discuss with someone and to bribe this person. They could have easily hacked in the bank. And what I would say for the battlefield of the 21st century is that this is more a war that has already started since a good period of time. Is the war between big companies or criminal groups and big companies or governments sometimes and companies to obtain confidential information to get an edge, a competitive advantage. And in this battlefield, there is a huge work to be done, because now we are more thinking about, when you talk to a CEO about the security in his company, it's more about, yes, spam, virus. As long as it works and there is not too much spam, not too much virus, it's okay. Security is working. We have firewall, we have an auditor that says it's okay. But they do not think about, okay, what if someone really wants to get a piece of very confidential information about me? What if this person was able to put a huge amount of resources to get that information? If you speak to the CEO of a large company or a large bank, for example, and you ask him, do you think your bank is immune to a physical attack? I mean, old school physical attack. He will say, no. Yes, it's immune, but not if they put large means and if they come with military personnel, air support, everything, they will ultimately break in. I mean, we're a company, not a military facility. We're not trained and equipped to fight that. And then you ask him the same question about, do you think it's possible to hack into your company? No, absolutely impossible. No, impossible. Okay. Even with all the means of what that a cyber military team would be able to have. No, it's impossible. I have the best firewalls. It's impossible. The problem is that people think it's impossible if you take a group of persons with adequate means, adequate training, adequate weapons, because that's kind of cyber weapons they will use, to break into a place, they will mostly succeed. And when I say mostly, it's like over 10 years, over some hundreds of penetration testing, we had a 98% of success ratio. And we are a small company based in Switzerland, not a military department with hundreds of billion of dollars of material. So I think there is a huge issue here. So that's my point about this battlefield.
Thank you, Cedric. I'd like to call upon Tony Witkalski, please, from VeriSign.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the cybersecurity ecosystem, I take the position that infrastructure-based capabilities are ultimately the most important, and a lot of that is what has traditionally been done here in the ITU. Cybercrime arrangements in law are useful, but when you consider the fact that they're applied after the cybersecurity capabilities have failed, one would want to ask, maybe we should focus instead more resources on putting the cybersecurity infrastructure-based capabilities in place. I think we've heard already that amongst those capabilities, it's trusted identity management that may well be the most important. And amongst identity management capabilities, arguably it's identity management, trust information about service providers as opposed to people. That's the most important. And it's that component that's really been lost over the last 10 years. When you go back and reflect on the history of the last 10 or 20 years, a combination of the technology and the platforms and the regulatory infrastructures pretty much protected the infrastructure, provided that trust because everyone knew who the service providers were. Today, the service providers often don't know who their other service providers are. And that itself is actually causing enormous problems for everybody. And it's resulting in loss of revenue for other service providers, which tends to drive things. So over the last 6 months, here in the ITU and several other related venues, there's been a new focus on what you have to do to put in place some kind of a mechanism to know who the service providers are today. And this has been coined Trusted Service Provider Identity Initiative. And I like to liken it to doing a quick fingerprint check. Imagine if when you go to connect on a Wi-Fi infrastructure or you go to visit a website, if you could instantly gather some information about who you're dealing with or through whom you're accessing the infrastructure and be able to quantify that as a level of risk, just how valuable that would be. So that's exactly what we're trying to put in place. And it's arguably an infrastructure that will deal with these battlefield conditions. It's not a solution to everything. But in terms of all the problems that are occurring because you don't know who you're dealing with, it's a solution to that problem. And it's moving forward fairly rapidly, and basically the technology exists. Many pieces of the law exist to make it happen. It's not really regulation. It just would require service providers of all kinds to basically register and provide trust information about themselves, which arguably they do anyhow, or they should be doing when they set up business. In the U.S., typically, for example, if you want to be a service provider, you have to register with the tax authority. You have to probably get half a dozen different identifiers from the FCC. There's a whole bunch of different entities today. Problem is, no one else can get access to this information. They can't discover that information. They can't get access to query it quickly. So this is a mechanism that's an overlay mechanism that we're envisioning that allows you to get access to that information to make a value judgment about how much trust you put into that service provider you're dealing with. And I would only note that history may well be repeating itself. About 100 years ago, with a new radical technology that was on the scene, a digital wireless technology, it was causing mayhem in the world. And the countries of the world got together and they developed a treaty instrument to cooperate. And they did three things, basically. It was agree not to harm other countries. It was agree to provide for interoperability. And it was an agreement to provide for identity management. How times have not changed and how needed that capability is today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I'm now going to open it up to the floor. So if we have any questions from... Yes, sir. Yeah, press the button, please.
I wanted to comment on Tony's remark about trusted identity or trusted service providers, and the metaphor with the broadcast world. In the U.S., the matter of having control of a transmitter is a public license. It is discoverable. If you want to know who has his hands on that transmitter broadcasting at such and such a frequency and takes public responsibility for it, the reason it's discoverable is it is a public license, just as, and you've heard me mention this many times, the architect, the contractor, the building inspector. It's revocable. If you do something wrong with that license, it's not like you can go from one vendor's certification program to another vendor's certification. That's yanked. You can never again operate a transmitter in the United States. So I think the metaphor is very good, but it needs to go all the way. It needs to be a public license.
I would only remark, by the way, one historical fact I didn't include was, although they made this agreement, some countries took the position that they wanted the free marketplace to reign, that this was more important than having some security within the infrastructure. One thing changed that dramatically and very quickly was the sinking of the Titanic. And actually, you gave the example of the United States. All call signs in the United States date from 3 weeks after the sinking of the Titanic, because that's when the Senate ratified the treaty. So I ask, when is the internetworking ICT Titanic going to occur?
Yes, Marco.
Just a short comment. ITUD is going to publish a book that a guide for developing countries with regard to cybercrime. So I've been working on that the last month, and therefore I'm very much always focusing on the developing countries. I mean, licensing is for sure a model that can work in the fight against these attacks, or verifying ISPs is something that can work. But I find it rather difficult to apply this Western world concept of licensing of the traditional idea of ISPs to developing countries. I mean, if you take a service provider in the U.S. or a restaurant in the U.S., we have quite an idea of what it looks like the one in Geneva. But when you go to a developing country and you have a look how restaurants look like, you have a street where you walk during the day. In the evening, suddenly, right on the street, right next to the street, restaurants pop up. People cooking on the street, and a significant number of people in these developing countries are eating there. It's the same with the ISPs. I mean, if you've been to an internet cafe in Vietnam, where ITUD had a great workshop, a great conference last year, you've seen those internet cafes, and that was really amazing. That were small places crowded with computers, and people were simply going there. Licensing our idea of that there is a regular business setup with a business with a building, and they're renting rooms and they're having a proper model. It does maybe not work in the majority in those places where the majority of internet users are. So if we want to protect the internet users, we might have to really try to rethink the idea of setting up such strategy and not apply the models that work in the Western world, that is well developed, no problem, but really apply different instruments that work in developing countries.
Just to build up on this, Vladimir Radunovic, Diplo Foundation, this was a great example on Vietnam, and there is another thing that I, at least watching from the perspective of user, can notice about the licenses. For instance, I've read yesterday in the newspapers that for the European Championship here in Geneva, there's going to be several wireless access points around the city. Now, if I'm just a spectator who's going to the match, and I just want to connect for a moment on my mobile phone, I'm definitely not going to check much about the licensing. So this is from the perspective of user. As long as we introduce licensing, this is good, but not enough if users are not used to that. To be honest, while I'm browsing the internet, many times I bump on pages which are certified by VeriSign, and I can feel a bit of confidence in that. But I'm not really upset if I don't find that. And I find myself a bit advanced user. So imagine just the ordinary users which don't really care much about it. Just to build up, it's very important. But it's also important to have kind of awareness building and basic, which we discussed also this morning, education of users on simply codes of use and so on and so forth. Thanks.
Yes, Tony, I'd like to make a comment after you as well.
Particularly with respect to service provider identity registration, we're not talking about licensing. We're talking about the fact that they've got to register, get a unique identifier and a key. It becomes self-enforcing with respect to other providers because, with all due respect to Mr. Gerke, they're getting access to a global infrastructure somehow, even if they're off of some street in some remote place in the world. Those bits have to be hauled by somebody. So the idea is if they don't have a verifiable, trusted identifier with a key in which the other providers can check as to the level of trust they want to impart, their bits don't get hauled. They get cut off from the world. So this becomes, amongst the providers themselves, self-enforcing. Thank you.
Thank you. AT&T.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Marilyn Cade. I'm an advisor to AT&T. Let me compliment the panel on the range of comments and perspectives that have been put forward, and note that operators do work very actively in a group called NOGs, the Network Operators organizations that exist around the world. There's, of course, one in Europe, one in Asia, one in North America, one in the Mideast, where information sharing and expertise is shared among those parties who do, on a day-to-day basis, operate networks and deal with a variety of issues there. I haven't seen, speaking here today, anyone from the parties who are most active in those groups, and I would just note that as we go forward in looking at the meetings of C5, which are about drawing together and sharing best practices and activities, that we should specifically think about ensuring that the Anti-Phishing Working Group, the MOG, the FIRST, and the Network Operators groups are drawn into these conversations and are contributing the most current and day-to-day discussions of their experiences and the solutions that they are putting in place. Because, of course, they are engaged every day in dealing with these demands and the demands of end users, whether those are government users or those are business users or those are end user customers. And I think that they, too, would find the discussions here interesting, but also be able to make a real-time contribution. I will just say, follow on to a comment that Marco made. I attended several of the cybersecurity workshops that have been organized by the development sector. And I think that several of the people who are participating here have also participated in those workshops and can speak to the direct contribution that more outreach and sharing of information about the perspectives by the speakers here, but also the on-ground experiences might offer to help to heighten awareness about the day-to-day work that is presently underway?
Thank you very much. I'd like to just make a comment. I mean, it directs from that gentleman at the back. I mean, when we talked about users, I think that one of the things we need to try to direct ourselves in this question is, who is we? What do we mean by we? We could look at also what is the battlefield. If we look at the battlefield, are we talking about critical infrastructure? Are we talking about national infrastructure? National information infrastructure? Are we talking about commerce? Or are we really talking about the general populace and their ability to be able to communicate in relation to the internet and the cyber world? And is that the battlefield? I personally think that that's too big a battlefield. I think it's also a little bit too hard. The issue that I see is that I take the point from various speakers here that have looked at the issue of ISPs and whether it's registration or even knowing who they are is one aspect. One of the things that I think would be an advantage, and I just throw this out, is looking at issues of mutual authentication. If I go to my bank now on the internet, the bank authenticates me in some way. It might ask for single authentication, it might ask for dual authentication, but it wants to know that I am Adrian McCullough. But how do I know that I am at the bank? And this is where the big issue of phishing really centres upon, that not very many banks have implemented, as far as I know, anywhere in the world, mutual authentication mechanisms, which would then allow the customer to know that they are actually at the bank or at the particular site that they want to go to. I'll give you a little example. Only just Monday, my university, I got an interesting email. Now, I know because I'm with the Information Security Institute, I know the actual head, our CIO at the university, and there was an alleged email that came from his section. And it was saying, we've upgraded our security here, we need you to re-authenticate yourself. And I looked at the email, so I sent, it was actually on Sunday I should say, and I sent Neil Philander, who's our CIO, I said, has this come from your group? I'm very suspicious of it. He wrote back to me saying, yes, you have to be suspicious of it. It did not come from my group. And if you had hooked onto it, it's likely that what they were really doing was a form of social engineering and getting information so that they can then hack into our system using your credentials. There have been, as far as I know, a number of attacks now on councils. I think Orange Council has been attacked in the United States. I know that my council, where I live from, Brisbane City Council, has been attacked, where they're now phishing on, especially if you pay your rates online. And this is all part of the identity theft that Tom was looking at, is that I've received a number of emails from various people or various organisations saying, we note that you have paid your rates online and we've lost your account. Could you please re-authenticate yourself to, so that we can then backtrack and make sure that you don't get double billed? It's a fake. It's phishing. It's now all of these identity management attacks. These are the new types of way of people are now saying, maybe we won't go to the banks and try to attack the banks because we're using up the credibility of that area, because the banks are publicising to their customers saying, we won't send you this type of email via the internet. So now they're attacking other sectors of the community, insurance companies, councils. These are the types of things that are arising. I'll take Tom first, if that's okay, Jody, and then I'll come to you.
I was just going to echo that thought. What we find is that fraudsters, they're not stupid. They go after the softest target. The softest target is the average person out there. And you can make as much money. When you talk to fraudsters and say, do you try and break into individuals' bank accounts? Often they'll say, no, what's the point in doing that? Because I can make more money if I use their identity to go and apply for a loan. They probably don't have much money in their bank account. So I think that fraudsters are realizing that actually you can make a lot of money just by going after the general population. And that's why I think that part of the battlefield we need to wrestle with is the fact that that community is focusing its attention on us as individuals just as much as it is on institutions. And we as individuals aren't prepared for it at all.
Thank you, Jody Westby. One thing that's very clear in the message that many of you have touched on is the changing nature of the cyber threats, cybercrime we're dealing with, from the script kiddie and hacker and more ego gratification to real organized criminal activities. We know that terrorist rings and organized criminal rings are cooperating with each other. But we also know that there are 120 to 130 countries actively developing information warfare capabilities. We also know that bot herders are controlling millions of computers around the globe. Some of these were deployed in the attacks against Estonia. I've asked some experts, what do these guys cost? Well, in fact, they're so cheap. One of the reasons we're not writing about it is because we don't want people to know how cheap they are. So we have a very volatile situation here that is far more sophisticated than the conversations that we've been having. And I don't mean the panel, certainly. I mean generally. We have a situation where the response baton is going to have to pass very quickly from the responder within an organization to perhaps law enforcement to military and government assistance. And we have issues, for example, I'll give you some examples. Cisco recently has had some problems with counterfeit hardware that is embedded to not function properly. We have certainly areas where we have malware within systems. One of the biggest fears we have is where malware can get in a system and cause a system to do bad things and we don't know it. For example, generate bogus transactions that could wreak havoc with the financial community. We have VoIP, where in the United States we have at least one full entire department of the U.S. government on VoIP systems, yet we don't know how to prioritize, authenticate, or authorize packets. So that means we would not have priority access. We have technologies that can sniff packets. It can reroute them. It can alter the contents. It could send them to the NSA and then send them on with virtually no performance degradation. So when at the end of that, we have a situation where very rapidly countries are going to have to become involved to help counter this. This is not something an organization can counter on their own. And when that response baton gets passed, we have numerous policy issues and technical issues. Who in a company decides that the government can suddenly take on their network and use it? And how are they going to actually have a counterattack or defend their own networks if they aren't traversing other countries' communications networks? And so the thing we have to do is get this conversation one step farther from the criminal attack to the critical infrastructure and the kinds of things to saying, how are we going to deal with cyber criminal activities that could in fact be cyber warfare activities or cyber criminal that will require government assistance that most likely would be military.
Thank you, Jody. Could I have the gentleman up the far? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Paul Kane from Community DNS, and may I echo what Marilyn Cade said. Congratulations to the panel. It's good to see such diversity. Let's start from the premise that cybercrime is bad, and also let's start from the premise that there are laws within each country that on the whole try and protect the user in one form or another. I think one needs to be exceptionally careful that the Internet doesn't lead to a new set of treaties, for want of a better word, that or echo the fact that cybercrime is bad. We learnt from Cedric that even within very secure establishments like banks, it is possible to breach security. Tony Ratowski's idea of having a list of those infrastructure providers that are bona fide, one needs to be very careful that that list is not, if it were to come about, and I would caution possibly having such a list, by virtue of the fact that it's a very competitive world, and the bad guys, due to it being a competitive world, will try and take legitimate companies' reputation and destroy it. And it's very difficult in an international arena to decide whether or not someone has been hacked and that reputation is being destroyed remotely, or indeed the ISP is conducting bad activity. So all I would say is be very, very careful of what you ask for, because as Cedric has pointed out, and indeed as Marco pointed out earlier, one needs to be very careful in trying to have a rigid structure for something that's exceptionally dynamic.
Yes, Marco.
This is an excellent point. And when you said, well, cybercrime is bad, okay, I think we can all agree on that. And Jody, I think if you take it to cyber warfare, 2 weeks ago we had a conference in Ankara from the NATO dealing with this topic. 3 weeks ago we had one on the UN here, just across the street. Well, that's for sure. But the same technology that those people, criminals, are used by civil people as well. And I'm teaching for 5 years in China, in Macau, international criminal law. And I'm on a regular basis speaking to people there who say, listen, we're very much depending on anonymity when we're publishing information. And those people who are offering web space to publish those information are depending on anonymity as well. If they need to register, that's the end of free publication. It's not only China, there are other places as well. You find it in Europe as well, and we've made good experiences with, especially in the United States, with freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and if we start to control more and more things, it is. I completely agree that up to a large extent you will be able to more efficiently fight against cybercrime, but we have to ask the question: where is the border? Where do we stop? Where do we find the balance? More and more control. I mean, I can right away tell you what the developing countries, and I'm not coming, from my point of view, I'm coming from Germany. This is quite a developing country if I compare it to Switzerland, but I can tell you what a developing country would very likely say. I mean, they say, you have benefited from the internet for at least 10 years now, and there is a great growth in the economy in your countries, in your part of the world. There was no limitation, there was no registration obligation. But now, companies from the Western world, and Tony, this is not meant personally, and it's not against VeriSign, but now companies from the West are telling us, you're going to be locked off the internet, your bytes will not pass anymore if you don't verify, buy our products, and we're going to keep a database of that. I think that it sounds interesting from a theoretical point of view, and for sure this is something that we can discuss as one solution. But from my point of view, we have to think a little bit more in the context of where are actually the users, and they're in developing countries, and what are the advantages we do when we implement such technology, and what are the risks, and do we really want to take this, and how do nearly finished. How do we find the balance? And I can tell you, there are cameras all around here. I give you an example, which is, it's again child pornography, and child pornography is something bad, and you can kill any discussion with child pornography. But most of the child abuse is done in the family. And if we would start putting those cameras in all those private houses, we could maybe stop child pornography. It's child abuse to a large degree. But do we really want to do it? No. And in the internet, we have to ask the same question.
Just behind you, sorry, the lady.
I think I understand your point. I'd like to argue that the internet, when it started, the world was very different. We've now spread the risk, and the threat from the internet is a lot greater in lots of different dimensions. And I think it's unfortunate that the countries of the South or the developing world may take that position that we want to also now gain, but that the risk is much more greater now because of the spread, and therefore you can't let it run open loop. Some form of control is needed. And I think that's a debate I hope that we can have more, Tony, with some structure. The exposure is very high, both economical and on the human side. You talk about child pornography. Human trafficking is $1 billion business, which has made the criminals connect across the globe. So I think, unfortunately, consciously, we can't sit back and say, well, it's somebody else's decision. We actually have to make the decision. And I think it's our responsibility to actually guide countries, and not just developing, but the developed countries. I come from the UK, and we have a huge issue over there with pedophiles. So there's an issue that everybody's recognizing. It's like, we've made a mistake, let's learn from it. It's how we create the awareness in the South and in developing countries so that they don't feel that now we're going to be falsely restricted. Thank
you. Tony, could you?
There is no internet. Okay? There are internets. They've been around for a while, and they're all interconnected. As I was sitting here in this meeting, I have a spam fax that came in through some gateway on the TCP/IP internet into the PSTN that went to a fax server that went to a VPN for me right here. It's all part of the same integrated infrastructure, and it even controls our utility systems now. They're called SCADA networks. And in case you aren't aware, the regulatory agency in the United States that controls those for the electrical system ordered complete isolation from anything having to do with the TCP/IP internet. Cut off completely. And in fact, they're even doing red team exercises to make sure there aren't any back doors. So some communities are actually taking very drastic action. And that for those who don't like the idea of a trusted SPID mechanism, I invite you to find out a little bit more. We're not talking about certifying bona fides. We're talking about a unique identifier and a key in which that provider provides information which enables a trust mechanism amongst other providers and end users. If you don't have this capability, you may as well go home, because you're never going to get anywhere. It's just going to get worse and worse. Okay?
The gentleman from Syria.
Chairman, when we go cross borders, every border asks us, show me your passport. Is it infiltrating the privacy of the people? I don't understand. And people talking on behalf of developing countries. I don't agree to that. I am controlled at any border, which is logic, which everybody accepts. And now you tell me this is wrong, this is intruding in the privacy of the people? What is that? And we don't need lessons from developed countries, Chairman. We have been suffering so much, so we would like to have, what's the wrong with the identity? The identity was a code number. You go now, next room, study group 4, all operators have an identity now. They get a digit and they peg ITU to give them that and to register that, and they never call it interfering in our privacy.
Alexander?
Yeah, this is a very, very, very interesting discussion. But I think let's try to be clear about a few things. I spent quite some time in the development sector and started the cybersecurity activities there. I've been to many developing countries. And the delegate from Syria said something which is really important, because we were together in Istanbul in 2002 trying to get cybersecurity in the development sector, and in 2006 in Doha. The developing countries are not saying that. They are the ones asking ITU. They are pushing ITU to put in place solutions. And it's a little bit not fair to think that because we are talking about cybersecurity, there's going to be this rigid centralized structure. There've always been centralized structures. You tell me here anybody from any country who is coming from, who doesn't have a centralized structure in their country. There's a government. Of course, we could say the citizens should manage everything. We do almost like what is happening in the democratie populaire as they have in some areas in Switzerland. But let's not fool ourselves thinking that, it is the first time that there's going to be this coordination. Coordination has always existed. There's always been an entity that coordinates things. And you tell me which domain, tell me any domain, and you tell me a country, I'll tell you that there is something there, there's some central authority which is trying to facilitate things. Otherwise, it's chaos. The other thing which Sama mentioned, which is important, I think maybe some people might not have been active at the beginning of the Internet. Those of us who learned the Internet when it was called ARPANET, it wasn't called the Internet. It was one of the TCP/IP networks. It is something which was set up within a well-defined area for a group of trusted people. It has expanded now without the necessary features that we need today. So we cannot just keep on talking about the fact that, it's always been open. Yes, it was open because it was a fixed community. It was a specific project. There are many things which we talked with, I had a long discussion with Robert Kahn. We talked about, the origins of the Internet. Why wasn't security part of it? He explained this to us. So there are things that we are trying to fix now. At the same time, this discussion doesn't have anything to do with blocking developing countries from getting into the Internet. They know that it is costing them a lot. The lack of security is costing them a lot. So I think it's something we need to take into perspective. The fact that there will always be some entity which is responsible for facilitating or coordinating, whatever you want to call it. But without that, we are talking about complete chaos. Thank you.
Marco?
I just wanted to say maybe this is a misunderstanding. I don't have any problem if I travel to another country to show my ID, but I would have a problem if I go to a shop and the shop tells me, show your ID, and if I go to a phone booth to make a phone call, yes, show me your ID. And maybe just, because we spoke about the UK, let me just give you two examples. Under the EU presidency of the UK very much pushed the idea of data retention. So we do now have data retention legislation in Europe. And what this is basically is, if we compare it to the real world, you're leaving your house, it's recorded. You're turning right, it's recorded. You're going along and it takes you 5 minutes to go to the next corner, that's recorded. Wherever you go, whatever you do, it's recorded. So that is an approach where I would say I wouldn't like this to be happening in the real world. When I leave with my car in my garage, I don't want anybody to record where I'm going. And giving you a second example is again from the UK, the third part of the Regulation Investigatory Power Act is giving the UK authorities the possibility to order the suspect of a crime to hand out encryption keys that he was using. In most parts of the world, we would simply say, no, we wouldn't like this to happen. I mean, if we are a suspect of a crime, fundamental rights protect us, and we can sit back and say, hey, I give you my name, and I give you the phone number of my lawyer, and that's it, and that's all the cooperation. But in the UK, you can go to prison for 2 years, for up to 2 years, for refusing to hand out a password that you've used for encryption. So from my point of view, that's where I feel that's too much regulation, and that's not the right approach. We should try to balance again. So therefore, again, no problem with regard to the passing a border. I fully agree. But if it is getting, everything I'm doing, will be recorded, and everywhere I have to register. No, that's, from my point of view, too much.
This is starting to sound like Piccadilly Station. We're going to do now Cedric, followed by Akadi, and then the gentleman from Carnegie Mellon.
Just to answer to the story with the encryption keys and the obligation in the UK to deliver them. Here is a mobile phone you can buy in any shop, but on this mobile phone there is a software that enables secure communication that allows me to call me a lot of my friends and contacts without any possibility of intercepting the communication, of identifying that I'm calling this person, and in some case even of localizing where I am now. So I can talk anonymously, nobody can know who am I talking to, what I'm telling to them. Okay. Philosophically, I agree with the encryption key. I'm shocked too, because I would like to have to release my hard drive encryption key. But with this kind of technology available, it's even if the phone network is very well identified, each service provider has a license. Okay, for this I have to buy this. To buy the SIM card in here, I have to give my ID in Switzerland. Still, I can put a software on it, take out the SIM card, throw it away, or even leave the SIM card inside. They know where I am, but they don't know who I'm talking to. They do nothing. So I don't think identifying ISP telecom network ISP are identified, but it's not enough. You can always go around, get a solution, make some special software to go around security. And about the law, I'm shocked by this law, but if I was a cop, what would I do? Guy, this costs 2,000 Swiss francs. That's nothing for a criminal.
It's even easier because the software was developed plausible deniability, where I can use two different keys and I give them one, which leads to minor interesting illegal content, and the real illegal content is behind it. So it shows the community is reacting. The software is specially produced for the UK and it's now available everywhere, so it can be circumvented. So it's
Akadi.
Thank you. Internet doesn't have borders, so it's a problem to ask about identities, because it's very difficult to know where it's necessary. Because, yes, in real life we do this, but it's impossible to do this in Internet because people connect with each other without any problem in many countries. So the first thing, we need to think about security without interruption of life, of real life on Internet. But we need to think about user again, and user-oriented technology. And as a challenge in technologies and policy is user-oriented identity. And now we have a very new name, a very new direction in technologies, personal digital identity. It means that user will be in the center of position, and user will think about why and when and how much information he will provide when user, she or he, would like to get service. So instead of border, we may say about service. And if user would like to get service, this is a point where he need to provide ISP or bank or something else with his identities. If he would like to get more services which cost more, he need to inform about more identities from him. So I think this is a challenge, this is point, this is support. User-oriented, and of course we think about privacy, but now no problem. If you would like to get service, you need to inform about you. If you won't inform, you may only talk with other person and you won't get something serious. This is the first point. And the second, I think that each stakeholder, we may say the user stakeholder, government and business, plays a very important role. And I think that governments may provide much more support for security through mutual recognition. Because when we think and when we talk about source of threats, yes, we have a number of examples of criminals. We have a number of fortunate examples of terrorism. And we need to understand that it's a potential possibility for governments to be a source of threats. So I think that governments need to collaborate with each other and to prepare the special agreement to counteract such activity. Thank you.
Professor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a couple of points. First of all, I want to remind everybody what Tony said, which is there is no notion of the Internet. It is a bunch of networks that are connected, and we just kind of call it the Internet. Number two, Jody pointed out earlier today that taking the physical world and then using an example of that and creating an analogy with the Internet is actually a wrong way to do business, because the Internet has changed the fundamental dynamics. I raised this issue to respond to the gentleman from Syria. If you think about the Internet, think about the Internet as an overlay network. In networking, there's a notion of something called overlay networks. These are artificial networks, logically defined, built on physical networks. If you think about countries in this world as a network of people somehow who cannot be talking to each other all the time, the Internet is an overlay network that redefines how people communicate and talk to each other and get to know each other. The threat of the Internet to various governments is twofold. One is losing political control, and the other is redefining social structure and norms within the country. Now, I can understand there are several countries, for example, that censor the Internet very heavily. It's one of the networks that allows people to coexist. You can be on one extreme, a country which does not censor at all, and the other extreme, a country that censors it. The infrastructure allows for both of these things to happen. So I don't think we should be sitting here and trying to call it the Internet and making it look like every network in that galaxy of networks has to follow exactly the same rules. There is a lot of latitude out there. There's a lot of latitude for discussion, customization within the world right now, and it is happening as we speak. So I don't quite understand this whole notion of developing countries. I don't think any developing country is trying to tell any developed country what they should be doing. On the other hand, it is in the interest of the developed country to look at the mistakes that were made before and then fix them as they invest in their infrastructure. Thank you.
The gentleman from Syria.
Thank you. My name is Kisrawi Nabil. Chairman, I have never talked that we don't need the Internet. I have never talked that people should be denied from using Internet. I was asking not to allow people to misuse the Internet. This is what we are asking. Twice Syria was cut out from the whole world because we become spam distributor, although we were not the guilty for that. Somebody, them good intelligent hackers, put Syria on Thursday afternoon, because normally Thursday and Friday we have the off day, and then we have lost the Internet for 3 days. Chairman, we are paying for the Internet. We rent all these circuits from A to Z, Chairman, and we are used by spammer or hackers on the other direction. This is, we could not, in the old time, that people know it, we used to pay half of the circuit, the other one half. Now everybody is enjoying that. Across the Atlantic, we are passing spam free of charge. On the circuits, we are paying, all of us developing countries. So let us be careful on what we are using. You have so much control in the United States more than anybody else. So don't come and convince me that you have a free community and everybody could do whatever he likes on the Internet. There is a lot of control. We are not asking control. We are asking for somebody who is coming to be an operator. Just only have an identity. The operator, I'm not asking about the user himself. I'm thinking to have trust in the operators. The operator used to have such things, and there was nobody criticizing them of being... I don't understand. Could you tell me of any operator in the world, or ISP, has no address? Just we are asking him to give his label, so that when the message passes, we know from where it comes. Nothing else.
Tony, please.
To sort of support that, the trusted service provider identity work is largely being driven because the United States Department of Defense, for its global internet infrastructure of the future, called the GIG, the CTO of the Department of Defense signed off on trusted service provider identity as a mandate. So you, as a provider, will not even be able to become part of that infrastructure anywhere in the world. I suspect that will be widely emulated, as it is already even within the United States non-defense government networks, where they've actually are descending down to 50 trust point interface policy, which is being enforced sort of as we speak. So this isn't hypothetical. And I would also rather note that many of these identity management trust initiatives here in the ITU are being actually jointly supported by personnel from the United States Department of Defense and China, because China realizes, as the fastest growing infrastructure in the world, that it's already facing and will face these problems, and therefore looks to this institution and the collaboration that occurs within this institution to basically solve these problems. Thank you.
We have only 13 minutes left for this session. So what I'd like to do is just call upon each of the speakers, and we'll start with Marco, if that's okay with you, Marco, just giving a summing up of what they've taken from this session in relation to the discussion. Thank you.
Well, that's challenging.
You have 2 minutes as well.
Well, that's no problem. There'll be a lot of silence here. No, I think from my point of view, what I'm taking from the discussion is that we're right at the beginning of different approaches that are discussed, how to solve our problems, how to get us prepared for the battlefields of the 21st century, whatever it is. And we have heard different opinions even about what is the battlefield. I mean, we've heard identity theft as a battlefield. I wrote a study for the Council of Europe on identity theft last year, and I intensively studied it, but I still don't find it really the battlefield. It's not the point. We've heard about other things like warfare. I did a publication on terrorist attacks against cyber-based attacks against critical infrastructure, especially transportation infrastructure. Well, I still don't find it the battlefield. I think the battlefield will be, there is always going to be something new going to come up, like botnets, like other things, and we will need to react to this. And we need to continue. There is no end. Hopefully there is no end of this discussion, that we don't, there will never be the point where we all agree. We have different approaches, and I think all of them have something interesting, and let's try to combine them. I'm very much looking forward to that.
Thank you, Marco. Arkady?
Thank you. Our session as the whole meeting is intended to form the basis for a continuing engagement, to form the basis for continuing engagement on cybersecurity. This has the potential to lead to an enriched exchange of information, ideas, activities from different parts of the world, from global community, on key issues crucial to development of a secure next generation networks, a global packet-based telecommunications platform which built on security that can be used with trust and confidence but by all members of society.
Tom, please.
Thank you. I think for me, I have very little doubt that the focus is switching quite sharply to the consumer. They're a very easy target for cyber criminals, much easier than banks and other organizations. And cyber criminals know that they can make a lot of money out of them. I think that part of the challenge we have in this sort of discussion is that we often try and fix today's problem or the problem of the last few years. We need to look at what the problem is going to be like in 5 or 10 years' time, and the consumer is going to be in the headlights.
Thank you. Cedric?
Thank you. For me, we have talked a lot about certifying ISP, deliver them an identity. It makes me think about the financial sector, where each bank and each bank account and each bank account holder is supposed to be precisely identified, and we still see over the years, some scam artists that manage to set up virtual bank accounts, fraud, money laundering systems that defy all these laws and certification which exist since a long time. So I think that's when we'll do the same in the cyber world, we'll have to find something better than that.
Thank you, Tony. Please.
When I saw the name of this session and the illusion of the battlefield, I wondered whether that was really an ideal title. But rather interestingly, there seems to be a consensus that one of the fundamental components of what we're dealing with revolves around trust. And it's interesting to reflect that one of the key needs in battlefields, in real battlefields, is a knowledge of who the friend is and who the foe is. It's not as simple in this environment. And when we speak about trust, there's an enormous amount of work that's occurring that manifests that as assurance and assurance levels, because it's never as simple as absolutely knowing who the friend or the foe is. But it is about being able to assess an assurance level in a particular context. And some of those contexts, maybe you don't care. Some of them, maybe you really do care. So that is critical, and I look forward to having you engage in that activity here in related forums going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. What I've taken from this discussion is that I think it's, when we talk about ready, I honestly don't think we'll ever be ready. It's a dynamic environment. It is forever changing. There will be new types of attacks. There will be new types of implementations. I'm taken back to, and I haven't raised this earlier, but I'm taken back to when Trojan horses became a big issue. I did a study in 2004, and we looked at Trojan horses, especially keylogger Trojan horses. A lot of people don't realize this, but prior to the 12th of December 2001, there were very few Trojan horses in the marketplace, especially keyloggers. On the 12th of December 2001, there was a particular case published in the United States called Scarfo against the United States. It was a case whereby the FBI had lodged a Trojan horse, a keylogger, onto Mr. Scarfo's computer system. Now, the unfortunate thing about this was that the judge also insisted upon Dr. Murchison, who is a cryptologist and engineer within the FBI, who wrote the Trojan horse. And this Trojan horse was a very clever Trojan horse. Not only did it capture the keylogger for the PGP key, but it actually deleted itself. It then went to the sent mailbox and deleted everything associated to it. So Mr. Scarfo didn't have any idea what was happening. We then followed, shortly after that, a 2-year study. And suddenly, hackers had identified about, and even though Murchison's affidavit, which is on the internet, didn't explain exactly what he did, there was suddenly an emulation and an uptake in keylogger technology. They're the types of things that we need to be aware of and what we actually do publish, how we publish it, and do we really want to arm various people with that type of information in the first place? This is a very dynamic area. What we think is a problem today may not be a problem tomorrow, but there will be problems. Thank you very much.
Welcome to our last session of the day. I am Cy Goodman. I chair this session, and I'll also be one of the speakers. We've had one of our speakers drop off.
Sorry about that.
Welcome to the last session of the day. My name is Cy Goodman, and I will be chairing this session and introducing the other speakers. I will also be offering a global solution of a sort myself. We are concerned with, hopefully, constructive thoughts on global solutions that may or may not be in the pipeline, as the description states here. But we are going to have people talking about partial solutions to what are clearly global problems, and we're going to have some people talking about things that are already partially in the works and technically in the pipeline, and others talking about things that have been, are in very embryonic states of discussion. And again, I am Cy Goodman. I am Professor of International Affairs and Computing at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States. I think I am the only person on this planet with that title. And I also co-chair of the Georgia Tech Information Security Center and the Center for International Strategy, Technology, and Policy, both centers of which are very much interested in global problems relating to telecommunications and computing very generally. We're going to start our process here with Judge Stein Scholberg, who is a chief judge of a district in Norway. Judge Scholberg has a very long history of being concerned with cybercrime and laws dealing with cybercrime. Judge Scholberg is also the chair of the Secretary General's high-level expert group, and as it turns out, everybody on this panel is a member of the high-level expert group. We, among us, have very different interests that I think will be reflected in what we have to say, and part of what we're going to have to say, I think, will reflect some of the input that we have had to the high-level expert group. And with that as a basic introduction to all of us, let me turn the mic over to Judge Scholberg.
Thank you, Cy. I think we met first time at Stanford on a conference on cybercrime and terrorism in 1999. And that was the old time. Yeah.
I'm not sure we've solved a whole lot of problems since then, by the way.
As you know now, the Secretary General established in May 2007 the Global Cybersecurity Agenda. And a high-level expert group was appointed in order to deliver advices to the Secretary General and to assist him on making strategic goals for an ITU Global Cybersecurity Agenda. The high-level expert group currently includes 121 persons. We are, so to speak, a global multi-stakeholder expert group with a variety of personal backgrounds from outside the ITU. I was appointed chairman of this group, as I mentioned. The framework and background for our commission is explained to us in the paper on the ITU Global Cybersecurity Agenda. I show you this blue document. If you've not read it, please do it. It describes in details why we are here as a high-level experts group. And you will also find forewords by President Oscar Arias Sanchez of Costa Rica and Secretary General Dr. Amadon E. Torre. In this paper, the framework for our work is presented to us in 7 main strategic goals for the Global Cybersecurity Agenda. Let me make the following reference in the document for our framework. I quote, "The Global Cybersecurity Agenda will unite existing initiatives and partners with the objective of proposing global strategies to address today's challenge in the fight against cybercrime and to maintain cyber peace. The ultimate aim of the global cybersecurity agenda is to make significant progress on the agreed goals in the fight against cybercrime. Increase the level of confidence and security in the information society. It is based on cooperation and strives to engage all relevant stakeholders in a concerted effort to build security and confidence in the information society. End of quote. The Secretary General has asked us as experts to advise him on these main strategic goals. We shall deliver our expert opinions, but it is the Secretary General that will decide if and how he may use the advices. We are delivering expert reports and shall leave the politics, both internal ITU and in general, to him and to the next levels of decision in this process within the ITU system. We had our first meeting in October 2007 and our second meeting yesterday, May 21st. In between, we had 2 ad hoc discussions meetings, a 3-day meeting in January and 2-day meeting in April, and lots of emails and other communication and meetings. We could not finally conclude yesterday and have invited the expert group to a 3rd meeting on June 26th, when we will discuss and conclude on the recommendations and advices to the Secretary General. The content of the reports will, in the meantime, be finalized by 5 area leaders. In order to assist the Secretary General in developing strategic proposals to member states on strategies for global cybersecurity, the high-level experts group may suggest the following advices on 5 work areas, and these are legal measures, technical and procedural measures, organizational structures, capacity building, international cooperation. I will give you some remarks on the legislative measures, which also are the work area leader. And Solange will also explain something on the rest of the work areas, yes. So the main strategic goal for a legislative measure is the elaboration of strategies for the development of a model cybercrime legislation that is globally applicable and interoperable with existing national and regional legislative measures. The Convention of Cybercrime of 2001 is a historic milestone in the fight against cybercrime. Member countries of the Council of Europe should complete the ratification, and non-member countries should consider the possibility of acceding to the Convention. Other countries should use the Convention on Cybercrime as a guideline by implementing the standards and principles it contains in accordance with their own legal system and practice. It is very important implementing at least Articles 2 to 9 on substantive criminal law section and establishing the procedural tools necessary to investigate and prosecute such crimes as described in Articles 14 to 22 in the section of procedural law. They are therefore attached to the report as a guideline. In our opinion, it may be very important that United Nations institutions such as ITU recommends ratifications or being a party or implement the standards and principles of a global convention, or at least use the basic articles as a guideline. Supplementing these articles may be necessary due to the technological development since 2001. Countries should also especially consider legislation efforts against spam, identity theft, phishing, and the criminalization of other preparatory acts, and massive and coordinated cyber attacks against critical information infrastructure. Voice over IP may be a challenge for law enforcement in the future, and government and VIP industry should work together to ensure that law enforcement has the tools it needs to protect the public from criminal activity. In the fight against terrorist misuse of Internet and related ICTs, it is recommended that member countries of the Council of Europe sign and complete the ratification of the Convention of the Prevention of Terrorism of 2005, and that non-members should consider the possibility of using the Convention as a guideline. Implementing the standards and principles contained in Article 5 on public provocation to commit a terrorist offence, Article 6 on recruitment for terrorism, Article 7 on training for terrorism is especially important in accordance with their own legal system and praxis. In addition, the Cybercrime Convention has been studied with relation to terrorist misuse of the Internet and has been found to be important to defend it. Given the ever-changing nature of information and communication technology, it is virtually impossible for law enforcement in most parts of the world to keep up with criminals in their constant effort to exploit technology for personal and illegal gain. With this in mind, it is critical that police work closely with government and other elements of the criminal justice system, Interpol, and other international organizations. The public at large, the private sector, and non-governmental organizations to ensure the most comprehensive approach to the problem. There are several challenges facing prosecutors today in order to successfully prosecute criminal cases. Thus, international coordination and cooperation are necessary on prosecuting cybercrime and require innovation by international organizations and governments in order to curb this serious challenge. In conducting cybercrime investigation and prosecution, countries should ensure that procedural elements include measures that preserve the fundamental rights to privacy and human rights and described in the internationally recognized human rights principles as enshrined in the United Nations conventions. And at the least, also among the important cybersecurity legal measures in civil matters are a broad array of requirements enacted by governments, authorities that bear directly on the infrastructure-based and operational requirements imposed on those who provide and operate network infrastructures and services, or supply the equipment and software or end user. So that conclude my first presentation.
Thank you very much, Stein. Right on time. Our next speaker is Solange Giannuti. Hey, I never get that right. I've known her for years, but we'll just call her Solange. Solange is a professor at the University of Lausanne. She is in the area of the School of Business and Economics, and she chaired the HLEG working groups, or co-chaired the HLEG working groups on organizations and capacity building. And Solange will tell us about another scalable global approach to cybersecurity.
Thank you. So I will to share with you some thought about what is the meaning of global challenge. Because ICT security has a global dimension and deal with a large range of issues as ICT use of misuse, technical measure, economical, legal and political issues. It is important to develop a global approach to master ICT-related risks and threats. Challenges can be seen at a global level because all ICT resources are interconnected and interdependent, and because cyber threats are global, and also because information technologies are under the same kind of threat. But at the same time, technologies and use are very different and need specific organizational and technical security measures to prevent and react to incidents. So a global and unique security answer to different technologies, services, use or needs are not relevant. However, a global answer is needed to master ICT risk at international and regional levels and mainly rely upon international cooperation. But to be effective, international cooperation relies upon national levels. So specific action should be taken at national level to raise or build cyber security capacities of various actors in order to be able to deal with national and international cyber security issues. Awareness efforts, as mentioned this morning by ENISA, have to be done to educate and train all the actors of the information society, from decision makers to citizens, including children and older people. Awareness is difficult to achieve, and awareness programs are costly. But awareness is not enough to empower the end user in a way that he could be able to adopt a safe behavior. At the same time, efficient, simple, and cost-effective security measures should be operational. For that, financial, technical, organizational, and human resources should exist. As capacity building activity takes place at national level, resources should be found at specific national level. Nevertheless, global action to support cybersecurity are important, as, for example, development of standards, definition of model or guidelines related to legal framework for international cooperation. But we must keep in mind that most of the operational work is done at the national level. ICT level of penetration or Internet use can vary from country to country, even if the cybersecurity problem could be similar. The way to deal with them is dependent of local culture or of national legal framework, for example. A global challenge does not mean to answer a global challenge only by a global answer. So, any global strategy has to be adapted to local needs. Even each country is different. Some countries at regional level could have the same level of Internet penetration or have similar cybersecurity needs. So, sometimes having a regional answer could be relevant in specific contexts. In this case, a regional answer could be seen as a global answer. A global answer could perhaps be effective if the international community wants to focus on the need to use more reliable ICT technologies. That means that technologies should be less vulnerable. To achieve this generic goal, the market has to integrate security requirements into ICT product or services lifecycle development at the very beginning of the product lifecycle and during all the lifecycle of the product. So the question of ICT product distribution and economics model is rising. Perhaps a global will and a global approach involving all the industrial and economic actors could help to deal with the compromise to be done between product delivery, cost, profitability, security effectiveness, and vulnerability reduction. A global answer could also be relevant if we focus on a defense-in-depth security approach. That means that security must exist at several levels of any information infrastructure. Security should exist at the operating system, software, application content levels, at the hardware level, at the network level, and at the end user level. Every element of the ICT chain should have this security hardened in order to raise the bar, in a way that to significantly decrease the level of threat or the level of ICT risk impact. In this context, security in deep can be equivalent to global cybersecurity, because security in deep has also to take into consideration organizational and managerial dimension. With the global cybersecurity agenda, ITU proposed a unique framework to consider cybersecurity issues in a holistic and systematic approach. It is a unique model to deal with the global challenge of building confidence and security into the use of ICT. ITU proposed an innovative and efficient interdisciplinary framework from which global, scalable, and specific answers could be developed by several relevant players in order to be effective in international collaboration and well prepared to face the challenge of building an inclusive information society. Thank you.
Thank you. Ahead of schedule here.
Sure.
Our third speaker is Wes Kussmaul. Wes is, his title in the bio sketches that you all have access to is CEO of Village Group. The card that he passes out calls himself the Chief Instigation Officer. He's going to try to be a bit controversial with his discussion of his proposed global approach to a solution for at least parts of what bothers us with regard to safety and security in cyberspace. you got some inkling of what he's going to talk about in a couple of his interventions earlier today. He is going to be advocating a real estate approach to cybersecurity. Wes?
Thank you, Sai. So the question is, are there any global solutions in the pipeline? And I believe the answer to this question is an unequivocal yes. The answer that I'm going to talk about has been in this pipeline so long that parts of it have started to congeal. As our colleague from Syria noted, some very good protocols have been available for decades. Some of the parts I'm going to talk about are hundreds of years old, and one very important part is precisely 6 years old. That is the ITU's own World eTrust initiative. Now, the concept of an overlay was mentioned earlier. I'm glad it was. It reminded me that what we are talking about is an overlay. An overlay on the Internet. Usually an overlay is a superset of networks. This one is a subset of the Internet. It's a little bit like the GIGS network that Tony Rutkowski mentioned. We talk a lot about the problem of lack of security, but insecurity is almost always an effect of inauthenticity. We can't trust the identities of users. We can't trust the authenticity of sites and servers and client devices and client software. We want to create an infrastructure that provides spaces that are free of malware, fraud, predation, and spam, spaces that provide a measure of reliability and integrity. There's a very old term for that condition. It's called quiet enjoyment. Perhaps someone here recognizes where that term comes from. I know we have a lot of lawyers here. Well, we've been tipped off anyway. It comes from real estate. That's right, it's a real estate term. Quiet enjoyment is what your landlord owes you, the tenant, in good standing. Quiet enjoyment means a place where you can work or live in security, peace, and quiet, free from intrusion. It means, for instance, that you have a right to expect that anonymous fraudsters and criminals will not wander through your office, tricking your employees into revealing customer information and trade secrets. Quiet enjoyment means you can be confident there are no secret passages into your home or office. Quiet enjoyment means that the school or home or community center where your kids hang out is not accessible to a middle-aged male predator who easily masquerades as a 10-year-old girl. So where do we find quiet enjoyment? For one example, we find quiet enjoyment right here in this building, or any building that carries an occupancy permit anywhere in the world. Where do we not find quiet enjoyment? Well, legally speaking, we find no quiet enjoyment outdoors. Outdoors on, let's say, a physical highway, a rest area beside a busy highway, or a rest area beside an information highway, or on the information highway. On that outdoor public transport facility that we seem to be treating as a trustable meeting space. We're here because the world's information infrastructure, the information highway and its outdoor rest areas known as subnetworks and social networks, the whole thing is one big slum without the concept of building codes and occupancy permits and professional licensing. It's full of fraud and predation, and it's getting worse, as we all know. Now, the information highway does its job well. It performs the function of an outdoor public transport facility. Tony Rutkowski has been calling our attention to the excellent quality of highway engineering that went into the OSI work, and some of the OSI work that Tony speaks of is also useful in that which highways bring us to. That is, buildings. That is, places of quiet enjoyment. One chooses to be indoors. one gets indoors from outdoors. It's not indoors is not a discriminatory space in the sense that we use it when we talk about the internet. Indoors is simply an alternative to the exposure to the unprotected outdoors. After OSI, the next big step toward quiet enjoyment took place in 2002. In my view, it was the very first attempt to put a very remarkable set of construction materials to use to build reliable indoor spaces. The set of construction materials is PKI. The effort to use this remarkable PKI building material properly was called the World eTrust Initiative, created by our own Alex Ntoko and Hamadoun Touré. The World eTrust Initiative, a world PKI space, was ahead of its time. Back then, people still believed that security could be obtained by determining the intentions of senders of packets. Some people still do. 3 additional steps will bring quiet enjoyment to our world's information infrastructure. A total of 5 steps will deliver reliable online indoor spaces. First, we know that one of the main components of the PKI construction material is the key pair. A key pair should be bound to the identity of a human being. With modern enrollment practices, we can have identities with quality and cost that is appropriate to the indoor space in which they'll be used. Some indoor spaces are more demanding than others. But wait, who says that an identity belongs to a particular person? The answer to that question is the same as the answer to the other questions. Who writes the building codes by which the quality of a building is judged? Who determines the professional licensing standards of the architects and contractors and building inspectors, whose professional livelihoods are at stake when their signatures are on the occupancy permit? The answer to all these questions is the same. The answer is what I call DCPA, or duly constituted public authority. And I'm not talking about government. I'm talking about authority, public authority, not government closer to state authority. It's a distinction that is very important and has really been washed away in recent times. Duly constituted public authority is the foundation of the remaining 3 items that will bring quiet enjoyment to the world. The Vital Records Department of an online city hall should attest to your digital identity by means of your X509 digital birth certificate. And City Hall or some other agency of state issues professional licenses, such as Tony's Trusted Service Provider license. Maybe I'm stretching Tony's concept a bit here, but that's the way I interpret it. In our case, the building inspector is a code auditor who happens to apply the weight of public authority to what he does. If a digital signature proves to be unsound, digital structure proves to be unsound, its architect or builder or building inspector stands to lose his or her livelihood because it's not a certification from some commercial enterprise, it's a certification from public authority. If you lose that license, you cannot practice that profession. It's an important distinction. Because there's only one city hall, one issuer of professional licenses. Now, where do we find worldwide duly constituted public authority that is appropriate to this job? Where else but in that public entity that has been applying public authority to digital communications since 1865? It's the ITU, of course. The city of Osmio was founded right here in this building at ITU headquarters on March 5th, 2005. Will Osmio be City Hall to places like Second Life and World of Warcraft and business networks, to the GIGS network of the U.S. government, other overlay networks? I think it can be. So visit the City Hall at osmio.org, osmio.org. Osmio is the Italian word for osmium. There's a story behind it. I won't bother you with that. to see how the city of the future will deliver authenticity, the basis of quiet enjoyment, to our online spaces. Perhaps one day it will be osmio.int. When that happens, you'll know that the ITU has accepted jurisdiction over our fair city of Osmio, providing a city hall to the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wes. Let me raise a different kind of approach and need with regard to cybersecurity. At this stage, and frankly this is still relatively recent, really within the last half dozen years, but we've now gotten to the point where I don't know of an exception, every country on this planet, okay, however defined, whether there's 233 or 200 or some other number, it depends on whether you call something fully sovereign or semi-sovereign, or I can define them by the countries that have distinct geographic top-level domain names. Calling these countries, we now have a situation where everyone, and there may be a few exceptions that I haven't been able to find, now has the Internet, or the Internets, whatever, but we'll use the term Internet just for convenience, has the Internet and mobile telephony coming to ground. Okay? All these users, the 1.5 billion Internet user, the 3 billion mobile telephony users, and I consider mobile telephony very much part of the cybersecurity problem, especially as more digital content is going to be going through mobile telephones. Every user, every troublemaker, every incompetent who might cause safety problems as opposed to troublemakers who cause security problems, and every potential victim, which is all of us, lives in some one or more of those countries. Okay? The world is still partitioned into these 200 some odd countries. Okay? And that's not going to change, not in my lifetime. It's not going to change in the near future. It is reflected in the makeup of the UN. It is reflected in the membership and the makeup very much here at the ITU. And when it comes to dealing with security problems, we're still talking about, for example, Stein is talking about a global approach which is harmonizing cyber law across all of these countries. Okay? Law is essentially obeyed and enforced on a national level. We can have great harmony across these countries, but ultimately it all comes to ground, just like the Internet and cellular telephony does. So an issue that we have here with these 200 and some odd countries that are now connected, and being connected to all of us, they pose a danger both to themselves and to the rest of us. Every single one of us. There isn't a country that cannot be categorized as being a danger to themselves and to other parts of the world because of this connectivity. One thing that's particularly disturbing to me is that the majority of these countries, the great majority of these countries, have little or no cyber defense capabilities. Okay? Little or no. In many of these countries which are now reveling at growth rates in Internet and mobile telephony use of 50% a year, 100% a year, or 300% a year, including, most recently, all 54 countries on the continent of Africa. They have little concept at this point that they and all of their users, whether it's individuals or governments or private organizations, business, what have you, are at risk out there. And again, most have very little in the way of any effective or not so effective even cyber defense capabilities. I find that very disturbing. So a case should be made that there needs to be a way to help develop globally with all of these defenseless countries, and frankly a lot of developed countries are more developed. The countries in my mind are either more or less developed. Saying a country is developed is sort of implies a terminal state that I don't think exists anyplace. But in any case, how does one help all of these countries, which is still very, very important and the basic functioning unit on this planet, help them develop operational cyber security capabilities so they can defend themselves? Okay. What is coming out of the HLEG discussions, particularly with regard to organizations, is a recognition, a rather explicit recognition, that much of the organizational development that has to take place has to be at the national level. And arguably, and I'm speaking really as an individual member of the HLEG now, frankly, the HLEG conclusions are not firm yet. But along the lines of what has been discussed, arguably each country needs to develop. Some of the more larger, more developed countries are more complicated, but talking about the great majority of the countries in this world have to develop this capability at the national level. They don't have the private sector strength to sort of develop their national cybersecurity capabilities from the grounds up through the private sector. This has to be done at the national level. And arguably, two kinds of organizations are necessary for each country. One would be a national cyber security authority or council or what have you that deals with policy, is an enabling body, deals with the rest of the government and with the rest of the population, all those people at risk out there with regard to cybersecurity matters, raises awareness and what have you. And then there needs to be a more operational organization, which are commonly called around the world CSIRTs, C-S-I-R-T-S. They've been mentioned here and in various other capacities. Computer security incident response teams. And our HLEG group has come up with a list of 3 columns of about 12 items in each column, so something on the order of about 40 kinds of functions these CSIRTs may or may not basically be able to handle for each country. And so, okay, that's fine. So the UN, the ITU is going to come out and say, hey, all countries, you should harmonize laws, but you should also develop these kinds of operational capabilities. Well, frankly, it's not easy to develop these operational capabilities. Okay, it doesn't come from a couple of people taking a course over the internet or what have you. I mean, the skills that are required to bring an operational cybersecurity capability to a country at a national level are really very, very substantial. Okay? So most of these countries are incapable of generating this themselves. And I think one of the recommendations that I hope will come out of the HLEG effort is that the ITU help them do this. Now that's easier said than done. This is a lot harder than just getting laws on the books. Okay? This is a long-term sustainable effort to develop these capabilities across all of these 200-plus countries in the world, again, most of which are totally defenseless or near totally defenseless at this point. Don't even really know how to start. Okay? Now, there's precedent for this with other transnational technologies. And I'll mention one that is a particular favorite of mine because I think it comes reasonably close, recognizing that, of course, nothing is like cyberspace, right? But at the time these technologies came out, people were saying there's never been anything like this before either. So that, to restate a couple of times what Tony Witkowski said, things don't change that much. And about 100 years ago, in fact, less than 100 years ago, aviation became something that the world had never seen before. Okay? It gave capabilities of a transnational nature to lots and lots of people around the world, lots of organizations, lots of governments, and what have you. And it was recognized early that help had to be given to all kinds of countries. At that point, they weren't even called developing countries. This is after World War I, in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. And there have been a whole bunch of international agreements that, among other things, helped countries create national operational authorities for aviation, okay? For safety and later for security, for doing things like harmonizing air traffic control and all sorts of other functions that just could not have happened in most of the world if there was not help being given to developing these national authorities. Okay? And then these national authorities, of course, in some ways, when you think about it, had to be coordinated. And the private sector couldn't do this, all those airlines out there. And through the UN, an organization called ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, was created to work with these national authorities to help them develop their own capabilities, to certify those capabilities, to do all sorts of coordinating functions among them, okay? I mean, airplanes do cross borders, and somehow most of them get between their starting point and their ending point safely. Okay? And I would urge, in terms of if the ITU is going to take its mission seriously over the long term and in a sustainable way, and that mission includes helping the rest of the world, or the whole world, develop operational, sustainable cyber defense capability in a very, very dynamic manner, that this is what the UN should care about, the ITU in particular should care about. The ITU is now talking about organizational changes. The ITU is not staffed at this point to be able to help in this way. But if we don't help in this way all of these countries, who else will? And so one of the recommendations that I would make to the ITU is that it think very, very seriously of setting up a little bit of a cart before the horse in some ways, but a very well-staffed, capable organization that can go out there and help all of these countries that are now irreversibly connected through the Internet, or the Internets, however you want to describe it, and mobile telephony, and help them develop cyber defense capabilities. Sooner or later, this is going to have to happen. Okay? Just think about past technology. Aviation is a good one, maritime, others. Sooner or later, technologies with this kind of connectivity and universality are going to have to exist from a safety and security standpoint every place in the world. And I think it's very prudent for us to start to think about doing that now. Okay? It's not going to be an easy thing to do. Okay? Just like it's not easy, and in some ways this may be harder, than developing all the national capabilities that are necessary to deal with civil aviation. It takes a lot of skilled people to make that work safely and securely at a national level on a sustainable basis. And it'll be even harder for cybersecurity. And I see no alternative. I mean, people can say, oh, we don't need another organization, we don't need this, that, what have you. I say wrong. I say sooner or later we're going to have something like this. And frankly, the sooner we start seriously thinking about it, the better. Okay, with that as our various little pitches for global solutions here, let me turn the floor over to those of you who have been patiently listening to us, and welcome challenges, welcome constructive suggestions, questions for our panelists. Graham?
Thanks very much. I've said enough about VoIPers, so I'm not going to say that. But I think a very good analogy is actually the banking world. Unfortunately, and I lost many good friends in the Twin Towers, but the banking world changed overnight as a result of that activity. And I think, unfortunately, and I do predict, I'm sorry to be the doom and gloom, when most systems crash because of peer-to-peer protocols tomorrow, people might remember those words.
Well, hopefully we in the world can be a little bit more prudent, although I'm not sure, and think about something a little ahead of time and not just sort of sit around waiting for some god-awful catastrophe. Sometimes, frankly, I worry in the world of we'll call it cybersecurity or C5, whatever you want to call it, that it isn't a Pearl Harbor or Waterloo kind of event that have been ballied about. But what is happening, what has been happening now for some years, is the boiling frog problem. And for those of you who are not familiar with the boiling frog problem, it's you take a frog, and frogs are stupid creatures, you put them in some modest lukewarm water, and they're happy and what have you, and they're croaking away, and you very, very slowly turn up the heat. Okay? And this thing isn't smart enough to realize that it's getting warmer, and of course each little increment is quite tolerable, but sooner or later the frog dies. Okay? And I fear that what's going on with regard to cybercrime and cyber grief more generally, okay, there are all kinds of issues in cyberspace. Things go wrong and people get hurt. Organizations get hurt. I make a distinction. Security is a matter of protecting against malicious activity. Safety is a matter of protecting against everything else. But in cyberspace, we've got incompetent operators. We have Mother Nature taking advantage of various vulnerabilities and so on and so forth. So all kinds of things can go wrong in cyberspace. And given increasing dependence on this, on this domain and telephony and what have you, we are becoming more and more hostage to systems that are just absolutely riddled with vulnerabilities. We don't know how to systematically turn those vulnerabilities into zero. We obviously have to keep trying to remove them and cut them down, but and we have, as users, been forced and cajoled to become so dependent on this that when things go wrong, we don't jump out of the bucket of boiling water. Okay? That we are collectively hooked on this stuff, and things go wrong slowly, or sometimes big things happen. God knows how many Pearl Harbors we've had in some sense or another, and we just sort of grit our teeth and so many of us are defenseless, not just the nations, and we put up with it because we're hooked on this stuff. We don't know how to complain. One of the observations made by a committee that I chaired that produced a very extensive report for the U.S. National Research Council is that increasingly, as cyberspace becomes, telephony, what have you, becomes more and more complicated, we are, as individuals and as organizations, becoming less and less able to defend ourselves. Okay? And look for simple solutions like sort of signing up for an antivirus, this or that, or what have you. And most of us, even those of us who know something about what's out there, don't know what else to do. There wasn't a single person on my committee, a lot of really good people on my committee, technically and mostly technically, who would swear that they think they are completely, totally, fully fortified defense. Okay? Yes. Wagner? I'm sorry. Yes.
Well,
Dr. Wagner.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully agree with your plea to the ITU. I think it is the most important agency. It has an irreplaceable role. So far it has done very well filling it. And it must continue to do so along the lines you have sketched out. But I feel a little uneasy with giving the ITU, so to speak, an operational monopoly. Because
monopoly is not what I meant. I'm sorry.
Good enough. Then let's qualify that. Because what we have out there is a great number of institutions that do very useful works, not only other UN agencies. and the regional entities, but also, of course, the private sector and entities like the International Chamber of Commerce, APAC, the European Union. What I would rather wish to be discussed in more detail is what in our private conversations, Chairman, we have referred to as an international regime of cybersecurity, taking a cue from, in your own writings, you stress the ICAO, but there are other international regimes which are really sort of a relationship between main actors, in part hierarchical and in part cooperative. And here I think it is quite clear that the ITU can play an absolutely essential conceptual role in laying out the work plan for what should be done in all these countries, but then bring the other agencies and actors into a structured relationship so that we have a synergy between all of them. And that would be the essence of an international regime of cybersecurity, which I think would be worthwhile fleshing out. Thank you.
Thank you, Henning. Let me just clarify, in case anyone else may have misunderstood the strength of my comment. In the civil aviation world, ICAO is not king in some really strong sense. Okay, there are a whole lot of national players, both private and governmental, in the world of civil aviation who contribute a great deal to safety and security and order and what have you in civil aviation. As much as anything, ICAO is a coordinating organization, which I think is very appropriate for a UN organization, and a similar kind of thing perhaps out of ITU would be in the offering, but I did not mean to imply that it is a unique organization at the very top of a strong hierarchy. Above and beyond that, I sort of outlined a role that such an organization might play, but it would not be, by a long shot, the only organization in the world that would help develop operational defensive capabilities in cyberspace. A number of them exist today. There are all sorts of international organizations, not to mention private organizations, that are trying to work the problem. But in some very, very basic ways, particularly with developing countries or less developing countries, I think there has to be an international initiative along the lines that I've described. Nabil?
Thank you, and please allow me to call you professor.
If you like.
Because truly...
None of my students do, but yeah.
Now is coming from a professor. This is the most important proposal I have heard since we launched this issue, developing country, at the development conference. At the development conference, we were asking officially through resolution 45, please help us. We need help. As you said clearly, we don't have the capacity. We have the experience. You referred to the ICAO as an organization. Do you know that the ICAO as an organization, which everybody admit here is the biggest in the hierarchy of safety of, but without the spectrum that ITU provides through serious conferences, would not reach. So we are totally in agreement with you. ITU should be the home for that work, but not the only one.
Yes.
We agree totally with you. We might need more than that. When we have built telecommunication in the world, Chairman, it was not ITU. ITU was giving instruction, was giving strategies, was asking people, please do your national plan for telecommunication. Who was executing that was the companies, the private sector, the governments, the public operators or private operators and so on. So please let us agree in this meeting on this, because we are fed up listening to the risk every time, and from meeting to meeting. We are coming here and we have heard that we need the help coming. Where is the organ? It's ITU, but not the sole organ. But let's agree that ITU could be the one who will put the strategy, who will tell these member states, 191, unfortunately it's not the 202 up till now, but at least they told them, look here, you should build that. And what you have raised was very, very important. The ITU today is not well prepared to do so that. The staffing, you have referred the word staffing. So we need to change ITU to be able to carry such a responsibility. And believe me, chapeau, as they call it in French. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Nabil. Yes, Canada?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Professor. Your analogy about ICAO is interesting, and your analogy using ICAO is interesting, and maybe we could look at that for a moment and see that what guidance that might provide us.
ICAO is mainly headquartered in Canada, by the way.
Yes, that's right. And we're very, very happy, very, very happy to host the organization in Canada. And the ITU could move any time also. No problem with respect to our Geneva, our Swiss host. As you've described, ICAO is set up to ensure, does a few things, I guess maybe in addition, but as we've summarized it, to ensure the safety and security of civil aviation and that system of civil aviation that operates globally. So what exactly does this function involve? Well, they have to do something about the planning of routes, right, for aircraft, because they can't be crashing into each other and that sort of thing. They have an increasing role in ensuring the safety of aircraft and airline flights. And, they investigate accidents and and whatever goes wrong with that system of civil aviation. So I think these are the core functions that ICAO performs. And that does have some analogy to what we're looking at here in terms of cybersecurity and the role of the ITU. Let's look at some of the things, though, that ICAO doesn't do. Airlines are used for the transport of criminals. They're used for smuggling, the conduct of smuggling and drug trafficking. They're used to spread epidemics. But ICAO does not get involved in those unless it's at the direction of other international organizations that are set up for the purpose of, like the World Health Organization, to deal with epidemics, smuggling and drug trafficking, of course, the various law enforcement agencies that are set up for that, Interpol for in terms of tracking and hopefully apprehending criminals who travel. And if you look at that metaphor, it's a very interesting one that you've outlined for us. I think it might give us some help in terms of looking at the role of various international organizations, because sometimes we talk about this whole area of cybersecurity in some holistic way that captures a bunch of things that are happening on the Internet, which winds up then getting confused about, well, what exactly are we talking about here in terms of roles and responsibilities?
Thank you, Canada. Tony?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd argue that we have to look no further than the ITUR, which actually performs a lot of those functions. In fact, one of the quite amazing things that a lot of people aren't even aware of is the preponderance of the ITU functions and staff actually reside in the ITUR. And
the R stands for?
Radio.
Radio, right.
And
okay. I'm not sure everybody knew that.
And early on, it was realized that radio networks can harm each other. And nations cooperated much more closely together in these functions. And there was an amazing bifurcation over the decades that, frankly, was probably sustainable as long as you didn't have the network, the wireline network infrastructure, emulating the radio environment, where you had this kind of instantaneous global scale capability. But now, in many respects, these interoperable global networks, wireline networks, have the same properties as radio. And it would not be surprising that the ITU's R side, to some extent, becomes a model for what we have to do now. And it does exactly that. The spectrum management community helps in developing countries set up spectrum management communities. They set up monitoring capabilities and exchange that information. There's a whole world of activity on the R side of this organization that is, I would argue, in some significant measure applicable now to what we're calling the cyber environment. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Tony. Iran?
Chairman, we too are very delighted in the way that you're running the meeting. This is one of the most interesting sessions that I have ever seen during this WSIS process C5 actions. Very interactive and very positive. Chairman, let's start with the issue that not arguing that who will do the job. Let's say that the job should be done. So this is an issue. Let's not to separate that, no, this is not ITU, this is X and Y. First of all, we are sitting in the WSIS, and WSIS defined or designated ITU as a facilitator for this task. So that is, we are there. On the other hand, the Plenipotentiary Conference of the ITU has a resolution 141 that for the WSIS activities also includes ways and means how the views of other people who are not currently in the activities of ITU be involved. So that is on the way, and there's another group dealing with that issue, and perhaps there would be solutions for the Council and for the Plenipotentiary in 2010. The issue that Chairman you raised was very important. First, start as the possible outcome of your group that the National Cybersecurity Council, that the national issue starts. But then you go a little bit general. You say that we need to establish a universally agreed framework to do these collaborations. And this framework should start from somewhere. No problem with the national, but these national activities need to be internationally coordinated and need to be internationally at least frameworked or internationally agreed. We should have international binding for that. This is the issue that there should be some discussions that, starting from the ITU, no problem because it's the oldest organization and the task was given to the facilitators. But finally, who will be involved in the establishment of that general agreement internationally who deal with this issue, helping also the national institutions, that is something else. But let's not to talk that, no, it is not ITU now. We are not talking of ITU of today. We are talking of ITU in the way that it should be. And at least for this activity, or maybe a few others, we should extend the sphere of the ITU to cover all those who could contribute. We should not remain in our volume, in our area, saying this is us, we are doing everything, and we know better than ever. No, there are many other people, there are many new ideas, fresh ideas, innovations that could help. But let's start off the framework. Something that need to be done for internationally coordinate these activities, and somewhere or sometimes or someone should start, and perhaps it should be not a mistake to start ITU with the involvement of the others. Thank you.
Thank you, Iran. Actually, a whole lot can be said in response to you, whether an organization could precede a larger international agreement, or, I mean, there are different sectors where an organization that was coordinating and helping to develop national capabilities first sort of proved itself and then became embedded in a larger international agreement. And then there are other cases where the international agreement came first and then helped to implement the agreement at the national levels was developed organizationally by some international body. It could go either way. The comments are much appreciated, Iran. Do we have anyone else who would like to address? Way in the back. I'm sorry, I can't identify you.
Thank you very much. It's Paul Kane. Just trying to build on what the distinguished representative from Iran said. There seems to be two different aspects that could be addressed. One of which is the good work that's happening within a national framework, and possibly that through best practice to find out what each country is doing and how each country addresses it. There needs to be some need to actually find out what people are doing, and possibly there is a learning process there. But trying to possibly have an international framework, a treaty of some nature, to be the facilitator jumping the gun. It might be better to learn what each country is doing first, and then from that to establish how to move forward. I just raise that as a stepping stone to actually having something as a best practice mechanism forward.
Okay, thank you. Could you identify yourself? I think they're recording some of these things.
Paul Kane, private sector, working for a company called Community DNS.
Okay. For anyone else who would like to contribute a comment or an intervention or question to any of the panel members here, please identify yourself before making your comment. Are we going to hear from Nabil again? Yes, you're on.
What we have proposed, Chairman, we're only not changing the I2, a memo of understanding. We have the experience of this memo of understanding in the I2, which was open to everybody, not only members of the I2. We have done it when the global symposium, global satellite came in as a new reality, and we would like to facilitate that. And this global symposium MOU on how to use satellite was not, it was an MOU, everybody was equal there, any private sector or a member state or everybody. What we are asking, we need to have a centralized area where they could start at least to tell us guidelines, how we could build this, what you call it. When it comes to the execution and to the, as you say, ICAO, what they do, ICAO give guidelines. The national authority respect these guidelines. You could not, they could not enforce, they have never enforced anything like that. So please, we have stated even a mechanism in Doha, all developing countries, Chairman, without exception. We have asked ITU, please help us in this domain through creating a memo of understanding to teach us how we could do these things. Why we have picked up the word memo of understanding? Because this, by definition in the ITU, could cover everybody. There could be no exclusion at all. Thank you.
Okay. We have run over time. Anybody wants to leave, obviously can leave. I have no hold on it. I'm sorry. Saudi Arabia. Sorry, you were just out of my vision range. But let's hear from someone we haven't heard from. Please.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I want to comment on the place where we should have the solution for our problem. We all here in this room recognize that, yes, the cybersecurity is an issue. And we are all eager to have a quick solution to the cyber crimes and so on. We thought that when the ITU was identified as a sole responsible or coordinator for this, that we have solved a big part of our problem. Because if we want to prolong the problem and we delay the solution, we talk about general things and frameworks and don't identify a certain body that will be in charge to try to find a solution to this issue. You have talked about the ITU. I like the analysis which was said by one of the speakers. I forgot his name when he talked about the ITUR.
Tony Rukowski.
Tony, yes. And I think he's correct in my view. Now we have an issue. It was not here before. Before we had the radio, and now we have the fixed, which is a totally different problem. And we think that the ITU, in my view, if we focus on the ITU will try within the ITU to be the focal point, and we try to find solutions. We have solved at least 40% of the problem. If we still discuss who should do it and who should do what, this may prolong the solutions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Saudi Arabia. Other comments? First, from anyone we haven't heard from so far before we have second calls. Bulgaria. Please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Today is a very interesting day, and your session is much more interesting. And we would also like to support the idea shared by many colleagues and many delegates here. In ITU, up to now, what the radio communications sector does, ITUR, is that they are preventing the interference between various services on the treaty level by conferences. And I think that there is some analogy between the cyber crime, which is the form of interference, with all the negative consequences to the operations of the network and the outcome of the daily activities. To judge or to argue what should be what should preclude whether we shall be first developing national approach and then going to the international framework or vice versa, we do have the feeling that either ways are extremists. So the more prudent way would be is that we go in both directions and we try to harmonize them. Why we are saying this? Because the technology progress is accelerating with every day. So what we are fearing today for tomorrow perhaps would be, let's say, misjudgment. Perhaps we would not have fully estimated that the dangers of delaying activities. And why I'm saying this? Because actually speaking, every hacker is a sort of a predator. He has his own hunting territory. And this predator is hunting within his own hunting territory. It depends on the category of the predator, how many square kilometers are chosen by himself. But what we have to do is to do everything possible to limit this hunting territory to the minimum, to the practical minimum. And any way, any action, any activity in achieving this aim will be mostly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Bulgaria. Last call for someone who, yes, Cisco. At least you haven't spoken in this session.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This has been a very interesting discussion. In fact, all day I'd like to compliment all the panels on the not only the quality of the speakers, but also the interaction that has taken place. One thing I note is we've talked about this and your proposal, Mr. Chairman, is that we've had now 4 panels today. And the kinds of organizations that perhaps we're talking about when we talk about the need for international cooperation among organizations who are working these issues is the fact that we haven't really had representation from those types of organizations in our panels today or in this session from the floor, to my knowledge. So that while we're promoting international cooperation, perhaps, and I know the should work with other organizations over the next year, but perhaps next year when we have this session on C5, we certainly have a broad range of perspectives again, but some of the organizations that we look for the ITU to work with in that kind of international cooperation, the type that Mr. Simpson talked about with regard to the airline industry and the many groups that work with the organization based in Canada, that we could have some of that discussion next year and at least have some representation. It's, given that we have the WSIS facilitation role within C5 here, and the word is facilitation, is the word. It's unfortunate we don't have some of those other organizations, and perhaps we can invite them here next year to talk with us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think it's very appropriate that we hear from Alex at this point.
There is nobody, I think, in this room who got a personal invitation from the ITO, except the speakers. What the WSIS process is an open multi-stakeholder process. People go to the ITO website, they see that the meeting is taking place, NGOs, whatever you are, you register, and you attend the meeting. And what we have done this year is to make sure that there is interaction. We have limited the speaking time of the panelists to 5 minutes. That is why we have this interaction. So if somebody is not here, it's not because they were not invited, it's because maybe they had other plans. We made the meeting quite open, and we did not have specific hand-picked people and said, well, you are working in this area, so we don't want you. So it has been really an open thing, and we've tried to make sure that the people sitting like yourself, you can speak as much as myself, so it is not just a monologue from the podium to the... But we would do our best, and maybe if you have list of people who should be here, who are not here, maybe we might... when we get into that area, what happens is, why do you pick A and not B or C? So we just leave it open. Everybody goes to the website, you see it, you register, you come.
Did you have an immediate reply?
Yes, I was just going to comment. And But the same, I'm sure, is true for speakers from all domains. So the fact that Cisco's on the panel and perhaps some other company isn't maybe an issue as well. I just think that given the nature of the discussion, especially this latter discussion on international cooperation and what such a key role it plays, it'd be helpful to have some of the organizations that we think the ITU should be cooperating with here. And I think earlier there was mention of the network operations groups that exist, and FIRST and others that could participate that I think could enrich this discussion by giving perspectives on how this might work to truly be cooperative. Thank you.
Okay.
Adrian?
I agree with you, Chairman, on Cisco. I think the issue here is not that they were excluded. I think they might have not understood the relevance of their role within this. They would have seen IT security and said, well, no, I don't need to get into that area because I'm into airlines or whatever. I think it might be an advantage if the ITU considered specifically inviting these people.
Who are these people?
Well,
give me a list.
Oh, I don't have a list. I'm sorry.
Somebody should give me a list so that
okay.
No,
but we're not. This is not criticism on your group, Alexander. Please don't take it as a criticism. It's not. The issue is that it's a question of relevance. Everyone here saw the relevance in relation to their environment. The people from the airlines and other industries, which now that we've identified that there may be information or policies that they could progress in this discussion, they might not have seen that relevance, and it might be an advantage that we bring it to their attention in respect to that relevance.
Okay, at this point we've gone 20 minutes over. Let's have, I see 3 cards up from Graham, from Nabil, and from Tony, and please make your last intervention short, and then we'll close shop here. Okay, Graham?
Yeah. Following from the point that you just raised, individually we all talk about different security things. I presented what we do to the CTO, the Commonwealth Telecommunications Office, and Alexander well knows, for example, we're very active with Canto, which is the group in the Caribbean, for example. Now, all of those guys have got very, very distinctive views. Now, the response from the CTO was, I'm going to give you a country where you're going to deploy and you're going to solve the problems for them, and we're going to make that information public on CTO letterheading, and we're going to make it available to the world. What I'd just like to propose, and I know it's a very ambitious statement, is that the ITU is significantly more superior or more able to do that. If there was a country that was prepared to volunteer, I wonder whether the audience of vendors, suppliers, and everybody else could all take one country that might volunteer and try to work all of the problems out within it and come to a conclusion. But I don't think anyone would do it. It's utopia, I do believe. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Nabil?
Chairman, WSIS is over. We are here at the era after WSIS. We met here, member states, all of us, in Turkey in 2006. We took decisions. We were begging ITU to start doing something. Now I heard from my best friend, Mr. Art, wait another year. We have lost already 3 years. Now he would like us to, because we don't know who are these people you should invite. Please, Alex, invite anyone. Delay work. We were asking for MOU. MOU, by definition, in ITU is open to anyone interested in the subject. But we are not going to beg them, please come. But let us start to do something on a global basis to tell us, developing country, how we could create these organs. Give us a model. We have seen now for cybercrime, I am not talking about cyber, I am talking about cyber security. Cybercrime, we have many experiences, we have the European Convention and so on. But let us not lose time. This is which worries me. After all these years, we are waiting another year until we identify 5 or 6 people.
Thank you, Nabil. I should say that the viewpoint that Nabil has just expressed, some of those ideas expressed earlier, I've heard from many other people from less developed countries. They need help, they want it as soon as possible. They have been very frustrated over many years through the entire WSIS process, and it is now halfway to 2008. Okay. Last comment will be from Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It may be a useful parting thought. One of the entities that wasn't here, in fact, an area that wasn't even discussed, is down Avenue de la Paix. It's the World Trade Organization. As we speak, cybersecurity-related trade issues are surfacing there on a large scale. And inevitably, this organization, as has typically been the case over the decades, will be looked to basically provide those baselines which factor into their deliberations. So something just to sort of leave everyone. We may have a shotgun wedding that may make these things happen sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Tony. One last remark about a conference that is becoming up. There is only one operational national CERT in all of Africa among the 54 countries, and that's in Tunisia. And the ITU and the Tunisian government and Georgia Tech and Carnegie Mellon will be all co-sponsoring a meeting in November where the focus will be on building operational capabilities. We don't expect to have miracles achieved in those 4 days, but I think it's very appropriate that we hold the meeting in a country, and it will be hosted by one of the few, the only country in Africa, one of the few among developing countries that has an operational CERT that has been going on for a while. They can tell us about their experiences, how they got started, and so on and so forth. And let me just raise that as a place where some of you might want to come, help out. I mean, there are people here who can provide workshops that I think attendees would find useful. And there are people here who hopefully could benefit from those workshops and tutorials that we will probably hold at that conference. And with that, let me just, since it's the end of the day, turn this over to Alex. Do you want to say anything? Then I'll do it officially. We are finished.